Bar Association panel on nutrition. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can use nutrition to be healthier, happier lawyers, be better at our job, and have a better quality of life. We have a dietitian on our panel to help us navigate intuitive eating, bad diets, and common pitfalls and myths. We also have a lawyer and part-time fitness blogger to give us some insights on how this information actually translates into our lives, with some color from myself as well as my co-chair, Jorge Oben. And of course, nothing we say here is actually going to be individual medical or professional advice. Also, we wanted to let you guys know that we're going to be talking about diets, calories, and related issues. So if this is a triggering issue for you, please feel free to stop listening at any time. And it's also important for us to note that all the panelists today are going to be speaking on their own behalf and not on behalf of any of their works. So there's not going to be time for us to cover everything today, but we will have put together a handy deck of resources, which includes articles, blogs, templates, podcasts, and some pretty cool YouTube episodes that capture a lot of the materials that we're covering today. So first, we wanted to go over a couple of administrative items. We're going to be taking your questions during this live program, so please feel free to use that chat function, which is in the lower right-hand side of your screen, and then just press submit. This is going to be recorded, so if you do have to jump off, you can request a link from us later, and we can go ahead and submit that to you. And once again, if you are interested in learning more about any of these topics, we will have some resources for you at the end. So what we're going to do today is, after we introduce everybody, we're going to jump into a discussion with our knowledgeable panelists about intuitive eating, what it is, and how we can use it as a tool, diets and the relationship between diets and mental health, as well as practice tools for nutrition strategy. We do want this to be as interactive as possible, so we have a handful of polling questions for you guys to answer, and how we're going to do that is put it in the chat. So first, we'll start off with kind of who we are and what we do. I'll go first. I'm Elizabeth Tanier, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the FDA's tax section on health and wellness. I'm a trial attorney for the tax division of the Department of Justice, and I'm in the Court of Federal Claims section, which means that I primarily work on tax refund suits. We're going to get into what this means later, but I am 100% an unconscious eater. I can probably guarantee you that like 99% of the meals I've had during this pandemic, at least breakfast and lunch, have probably been like at my desk working, including, breakfast today, even though I really know I shouldn't do this. So that's me. Jorge, can I pass it off to you? Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. I am Jorge Oben. I work at the IRS Chief Counsel's Office International. I am a tax attorney, and on the side, I try to do triathlons. Many years ago, I was a little overweight, very overweight, and I was living on an unhealthy lifestyle, probably working more hours than I should have, and just focused on the wrong things. And since then, I've started to be more active, eat healthier, and that's what brought me together with Elizabeth and this group of people in this presentation today. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Do we want to? Can we go ahead and pass it over to Genevieve? Genevieve, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So my name is Genevieve Traversa, and I am a registered dietitian, which encompasses quite many areas in nutrition, right? So I actually specialize in eating disorders and disordered eating, and I work at a place called the Body Image Center. I very much function from an intuitive eating lens, which we're going to get a lot more into. So you'll see under my name, Intuitive Eater, and I will explain a lot more about what that means, but I am very excited to meet all of you and be here today.
And hi, everyone. I'm Lili Kazemi. I work at PwC as my regular job, but on the side, I have a fitness blogging gig where I really try to just aim disseminating knowledge about various nutrition and fitness related topics to people like us, busy lawyers and professionals who don't have the time how to figure out to be fit. And through that process, I've made a lot of great connections with people like Genevieve. I'm really excited to have her today. And what I would say is a recovering professional dieter, and I aspire to be an intuitive eater like Genevieve is. So very excited about what she has to share with us today. It's really great content.
And I did forget to say that I'm also an unconscious eater. I eat everything I can, and we'll get into that later, but I just had a big bowl from a fast food chain, which is not typically me, but I haven't made time to go to the grocery store. So I was just prepping for this session. I was like, oh my God, this is so wrong. But more fun. So we don't have a polling system, but we're gonna see if any volunteers wanna take a take on this question, right? So fun trivia for our audience. Which of these can change your BMR? A, your diet. B, your water intake. C, your exercise. D, BM what? If any volunteers want to try to drop in some answers on the screen, on the chat function, that would be awesome. In the meantime, after we get through this question, we're going to jump into the meat potatoes. No pun intended. We're going to get into the real stuff because I'm just a guy who eats a lot. We have really good experts here, Lili and Genevieve, and I want to see what Genevieve has to say about when she advises high-functioning people like ourselves about nutrition and healthier lifestyle. So let's see a few of the answers here. Let's see. Can someone help me? I can't really see the chat box from my screen.
It looks like we have a range of answers. I'm going to actually jump in really quick with this here. We have quite a few people saying D, BM what? And we have someone saying none of them. So it's kind of a trick question. I'm going to lean towards none of them, right? Because mainly just so you know, for information with that, what we have, it's mainly going to be genetic. There's not a lot that we can actually do to change it. Now, what is BMR? It's your basal metabolic rate. That's basically what you expend energy-wise if you're just resting. If you do absolutely nothing, you're sitting all day, your baseline, right, is what you expend. But I say a little bit of a trick question, right? Because when we look at diet, one of the few things we do know is that it can shift slightly, but what we see more than often is people, and we'll get more into this later, but people on restrictive diets who are eating probably less than what they actually need. And what that can actually do is that it can actually lower your basal metabolic rate, making it much easier to gain weight, right? Because it means that you are going to be having less as your base. So that was a little bit of a trick question. The other side there, we saw exercise in there. Exercise can very temporarily change it. One of the main things you'll see though, is if you have higher lean muscle mass, that can change it a little bit as well. So I see that we have, go ahead. Sorry.
Genevieve, we mentioned a little bit about intuitive eating. Can you explain what that is and what are some of the tools of intuitive eating?
Sure. So it's very hard to give a specific definition, right? So intuitive eating is a very broad, topic. There are 10 different principles within it, but to kind of try to bring this down a little bit and have it so we can actually talk here about it. I could spend, hours talking about what it is, but it is a way to learn what's called attunement to your body. So the general principle that if I could pick one thing behind it, is learning how to really listen to yourself and listen to what your needs are. Our body really does speak up a lot more than we are aware of for what it's craving in terms of food, what it needs. Maybe, maybe we're needing a little bit more fat in our diet. We're going to crave something that has fat in it. But it also teaches us how to listen into our hunger and our fullness, which often gets trained out of us. I don't know if anyone here was part of the Clean Plate Club or, told their starving children, but finish your dinner, right? That is something that was very common, I think, at a certain point, and it tends to get very trained out to the point that we no longer are able to really hear when we are hungry or hear truly when we are full with that as well. It also, one really important part of it is to reject diet culture, which again, that could be a whole topic, right? But it's really getting behind this idea that doesn't necessarily need to be a specific diet that you're on if you're able to truly listen to what your body is asking for. So I know there's quite a few tools in there. I really talk a lot about satisfaction, talk about hunger and fullness, right? And I know that we are going to show that scale later on, so I will leave that for a little bit later.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting when you're talking about diet culture, because that's kind of what a lot of us have been raised with, all of our lives. Like, I can remember from when I was younger, my mom stopped preparing meals with rice because she said, carbs or rice is fattening, carbs are fattening. And I'm from a Middle Eastern background, and I don't know if any of you have similar backgrounds or friends with similar backgrounds, but rice is a huge staple in those diets. So to have been, raised with this mentality that's really passed through generations of labeling certain foods as good or bad, as fattening or healthy, not to mention all of the propaganda that's out there, in magazines, books, but it's also backed by, licensed doctors who go through the science of it and explain, for example, how certain ways of eating promote insulin resistance, or certain types of exercise actually can raise your metabolism. Certain diets can reset your metabolism or detox you. So we're literally brainwashed with diet culture. And so when I first heard of intuitive eating, I was a little bit skeptical because as a lawyer, I like rules and I like, a prescription for following a certain way of living. But intuitive eating seemed to cut through all that. What I really found out though, in studying it and going through it and just being a professional dieter myself, is that your body is way smarter than you give it credit for. So I think that's really what you're driving at there, Genevieve.
Absolutely.
Before we move on, are there any questions from the audience? All right, Jorge, do you want to go to our first polling question, or I guess second polling question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So now that we've learned about the different types of eaters, do we have a few volunteers or any volunteers in our audience that would want to drop in the chat box? What type of eater do you think you are? Are you a professional dieter? Are you an unconscious eater, careful eater, intuitive eater, or I really do not know what type of eater? I am an eater, but I don't know which one. I personally am an unconscious eater. I grew up with the mentality that anything served, you have to eat it. And I'm trying to be, mindful that I hate letting food go to waste. So sometimes I'll see something there, even though I'm super stuffed, I'll go for it. It's just something I can't get over it. But then we have the fridge, which is a backup plan, but I refuse to accept that you can have leftovers.
I'm with you. I have the working throughout the day, and at some point I need to eat, and so I make food, and then all of a sudden it's like the plate's gone and I have no recollection of eating it. I'm like, oh, I think I ate lunch today. But what was it? Did I even enjoy it?
So what have we
Genevieve,
seen? I can't, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I saw a lot of people pick C, careful eater. Like, what's the difference between a careful eater and a professional dieter? Because that line seems to be pretty close.
Yeah, so the line, those two definitely can go hand in hand together. So professional dieter tends to be always switching, right? There's like a specific diet maybe they're on. The goal, I think a lot of times with professional dieter tends to be more centered around weight, whereas the careful eater tends to be, so I'm tentative to use this word, but there's this thing in the eating disorder field called orthorexia. I'm not saying that everyone who's a careful eater has that. That's not at all what I'm saying, but it can lead to it, which is why we worry a little bit, right? So what that really means is someone who they have really great intentions. They are really focused on their health. They want to do absolutely what's best for them, but it can tend to get a little too intense where they're maybe really scrutinizing, really going over every label. They tend to get information from somewhere or another and decide, well, I can't have that, right? So maybe it's not a specific diet like where they cut out all carbs, but they say, well, I can't have that type of carb, or I can't have this because it has sugar in it, or I can't have that, right? So it tends to come originally, I think, from a really great place, but it tends to end up in a place where it makes it really hard to listen to what our body is asking for if we are telling ourselves all the time we can't have something. So you'll see a lot of scrutinizing on nutrition labels and things of that sort.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Genevieve, do you see in maybe your profession or amongst your colleagues or what you've learned that people tend to fall into one category or another, or one is more prevalent?
So I would say maybe sometimes things become more prevalent, but I think that it can be a mix. You don't have to be one, is what I'll say all the time, right? I can see quite a lot of all of it on a regular basis. So yeah, I see a lot of people who are maybe have disordered eating, not necessarily even eating disorders, but disordered eating as well. And I feel like that sounds so awful to think like, oh, I have this or that, but these are really professionals. I think there's this idea that it is only one type of person, but I actually see lawyers on a regular basis as well. And I usually find that maybe it'll go together, right? We'll have like the professional dieter and the unconscious eater, or the professional dieter and the careful eater, or something along those lines.
And Genevieve, I think you just used the term unconscious, or what was it? Disordered eating. What is that?
So again, broad term, right? Disordered eating means I'm just mainly talking about your relationship to food is what I would say. So when we think about how are we personally thinking about food? Oh, and I see we have a question. I will get to that in a second. But when we think about our own relationship to food, do we think that we have this idea of what I call food freedom with it? Are we able to eat food without shame or guilt? Are we able to say, like Jorge said today, he often is trying to make a health conscious decision for himself, something I call gentle nutrition, right? Where he's made little changes in his life. But there are times when we're just really busy. And at the end of the day, we need to honor our hunger and eat, right? So he had fast food today. Maybe that's not something he does all the time, but he's not feeling bad. He's like, hey, I had it. It's okay, right? So I would say that would be a healthy relationship with food, where we're able to eat something in that way. Now, if we get to a place where we're like, I can't believe I did this, you're beating yourself up for it, maybe that might indicate that there's some type of disordered eating occurring.
And we had a comment from the audience too. I should just note that on this slide, I kind of tongue in cheek compared these eaters to people in relationships to make it more relatable. It wasn't how the intuitive eating book characterizes them. It's really just the first sentence. So just to clear that up, but I think the comment is like, if you read labels regularly, or aware, of things like sodium, which is like, I think something that, there's health reasons, right, that you want to stay away from certain things like sodium or too much cholesterol. So what's the line between that and like being a careful eater?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just briefly mentioned something called gentle nutrition. It's actually one of the principles, by the way, of intuitive eating. It's the last one, but it is there. And so it sounds like what this person is talking about maybe falls more into that versus necessarily the careful eater that is going to have like that kind of moral tie to it, that certain foods are bad and certain foods are good, which are moral terms, right? When we're looking at things that maybe we want to improve our health with, right? If it's something we are conscious of in that way, I wouldn't call that necessarily disordered. It's great. I'm someone who's a big believer in, if I like it, having fiber. So it also, I think one of the big things that comes in here is, are we doing this for health reasons? And are we okay if sometimes we have something outside of that? And then also, are we actually enjoying our food? If we're only eating rice cakes every day because they are quote unquote healthy, but we don't enjoy them at all, I would align that more into the careful eater instead of intuitive eater. I hope that answered the question.
Lily, if I could actually just jump back, if we could go to the previous slide where you could describe the type of eaters in relationship to someone being in a relationship. Can you walk through those? I think you mentioned that they weren't in the book, but they may be a helpful tool for those of us who kind of don't have a background or understanding of intuitive eating or the different kinds of eaters.
Yeah, I mean, the types of eaters are definitely in the book. So I'll tell you my spin on it, and then I think Genevieve can probably glom on. But professional dieter resonated the most with me just because for whatever reason or other, I diet hop. I mean, my husband is on this webinar right now, and he would always say, well, I never know what we're eating because I don't know what your flavor of the week diet is. And I think like part of it is not even as motivated, like result wise. It was just curiosity. I remember when I first heard of the keto diet, I was having coffee with a friend who's a trainer, and she ordered her coffee with heavy cream, whereas I had ordered a non-fat vanilla latte. And I just looked at her, I was like, that's your order? And she said, yeah. it's the keto diet. You can eat as much cheese and drink as much like, heavy whipping cream as you want. And I was like, wow, that sounds awesome. I want to try it. You just get kind of like, you get drawn in by the, fantastic shiny promise. So professional dieter, but you do stick with it. So you kind of go from one diet to another, but you do generally just try to be like the serial monogamous dieter. Whereas, careful eater just wants to make sure everything is in order and very meticulous. So that was the reason for that comparison. And unconscious, I think it's like, you can be the type of person who just forgets to eat, or, is only eating mindlessly, or, the codependency, I kind of drew a parallel to the stress eating, like you're depending on food for comfort. And then the, intuitive eater, I don't want to say like that's the perfect eater. I'm not sure, Genevieve, if that's the right way of saying it, but it is kind of the aspirational way of, I guess, how we would eat if we, if we can remember to a point in our childhood where we never had these thoughts and we just, asked for food or ate when we were hungry. But I'm interested in your take, Genevieve.
Yeah, like you said, I try not to say exactly what you said. I try not to say perfect, right, or anything like that, because I think that's really unrealistic ideal just in general, perfectionism, right? Not that we don't all want it still, or I shouldn't generalize, but I think a lot of people here probably. But I think it is something you said when we look at like how we were as a child. If you ask a child what their favorite foods are, they're probably going to say ice cream or something along those lines, right? And that gets trained out a little bit. But as a child, if you were to say, they want ice cream and you allow it, then it kind of loses its magical effect. I would say, right? Where like, it's called habituation. If we are really allowed to have anything we want, then nothing necessarily is super special, right? It's not just something we can have one time or here or there. And what we see often is when we do make things special, we tend to see overeating when it does occur, or eating something else to try to fill the void of what we really craved. So it's definitely an ideal, and it's something that I really enjoy and live by. I would definitely say I am an intuitive eater, right? I do listen to my hunger and my fullness cues. And I don't really use, now there can be times that you can use food to cope a little bit, right? Sometimes we do just have a day. You just have one of those days, right? But it's not my go-to. And I really do feel satisfied and healthy.
Have you always been an intuitive eater, or did you have to work to become an intuitive eater?
I was not always an intuitive eater. I definitely did have to work at it. I feel like that is what people hate to hear, that there's practice, right, with it. I'm like, I'm sorry. I know that it sucks that this is going to take some work, but I do think it's possible for everyone to get to. But there was definitely a time in my life where I would say I fell a lot more into the careful eater, where maybe it wasn't necessarily for me fixated overly on body image, but it definitely was labeling good and bad, which is very hard when you see everything around you as like, there's like foods called smart choice, quite literally in the name, or guilt-free, right? So like food companies do assign these moral labels and we do pick up on them. And I really had to try to get to a place and work on food neutrality myself. And I would say I'm there today. But even listening to my own hunger and fullness takes practice as well. And eventually it does become fully intuitive. But no, that definitely was trained out as a child.
Yeah. That careful eater, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, it's interesting that you say that, because like I'm one person who I try to be a careful eater. Again, I'm not that. But one of the things I struggle with, it's like I go down and there's so like constantly the messaging is changing. Now you can eat this. Oh, I'm gonna eat it then. It's healthy. But then it changes, and then a few months later it changes. So how do we stick to the real thing? Let's say we want to make a change. We want to go into become intuitive eaters. What are some things that we can keep in mind to make this work? For example, like one thing that we've talked about before, right? Like, okay, it's not it's really not about doing a 180 and changing your life. I think it's more of educating, like learning what foods are healthy, learning how to do it, and making small changes over the course of time and making your lifestyle. Not say, oh, I have a wedding, or I'm going on a vacation in the summer, let me get healthy to be ready for that date. I think it's more than that. So what advice can Lili and Genevieve give us, like, to make that more of a daily thing, that it's easier when there is so much social media messaging, so much confusion out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is so difficult with all the social media messaging. So many people trying to give their own advice, right? Like there are videos all over the place saying, do what I do and you'll be just like me, right? Which I used this metaphor the other day. Actually, I said, am I a professional basket player? No. I mean, I guess you never know, right? But like, I can tell you no, you're looking at me. Is my brother? No. So why would you think I would be one, right? I'm not going to be the same as them. So it really is individualized, right? When we see all these messages, maybe something does work for a certain person, but that has no bearing on who we are, right? So one of the best ways I can say to do it, and again, people hate to hear this, but is make an appointment with a registered dietitian. One thing I always like to put out there is there's nutritionists and there's dietitians, which people often don't know. And I didn't realize when I got into the field originally, but not everywhere, but a lot of places, nutritionists do not receive the same training. In some states, you can even put a sign on your front yard, say, I am a nutritionist, and you are one. So dietitians go through a bit more of a rigorous process for that, but they can really give you your individualized needs. Now, if that's not, I realize that's an investment, right? So what are some things you can do in your personal life? Like you said, nutrition advice is always changing. One of the reasons that is because it is relatively new when you look at medical field as a whole, right? Nutrition is a little over 100 years old in research, where medical goes back thousands, right? So that's one reason you see that. But if you truly are trying to listen to yourself and what your body is speaking up for, then all that goes out the window anyway, right? It doesn't matter what all that advice is if you are knowing what feels right in your body for yourself. And going to, of course, a registered dietitian can help you with a little bit more of what we were talking about earlier, the gentle nutrition advice, right? Should you be trying to increase fiber? Should you be trying to increase fluid in your daily life, right? Like, are there foods that are going to be better if you have heart disease or something along those lines, right? And I do have some of that later when we talk about nutrition and mental health that I was going to put out for you guys. But really listening to what feels good and what sounds good to you. It sounds wild. It sounds so simple. You're like, this is so silly. That's all I do. And I say, yeah, I mean, it takes practice, but really that will get you to a place where you are going to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But Genevieve, what if what sounds good always are chocolate chip cookies?
Well, I'll tell you that I definitely have dessert regularly. So I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, I will say that habituation we were talking about earlier, right? I would be surprised if the only thing you ever wanted to eat for every meal, all of it ended up being chocolate chip cookies. Right? So, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. There was this, study that was done, and they look at like, well, what if we gave like college age students free food, which, we always need, right? And it was pizza every single time. After day 30, they don't want it. They're going to turn down the free food, right? So that is part of it that comes into play as well. And then when you do want that cookie, it's not a big deal.
Makes sense. That makes sense. I'll never forget, I was at a gym. This is a very, very old story, but just along the lines of just like going to qualified people for help. But I remember seeing a sign well before I got into tax law, but it said you would go see an accountant to help you with your taxes. And the effect of it was, why wouldn't you go see a nutritionist or a dietitian to help you with your nutrition and diet? Because it's hard and it's challenging. And, you may be really good at your one thing, but, maybe someone else is really good at another thing. And it's, been however many years, and that sentiment has always stuck with me. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about diets, which I think we've been touching on. I certainly don't think we can avoid them. Like we've all said, we see them everywhere between social media, turn on your TV. We'd be interested to hear from the audience, if you can put it in the chat, what kind of diets you may have been on or heard of have been prevalent in your life in the past. And Genevieve, maybe you could touch on why there's so much controversy over diets like keto or Whole30 or low carb paleo. I think I actually learned this from you, that diets have been around since the 1800s, which is just wild.
Oh yeah, diets definitely go back. So that's when we started seeing the low carb, I think, come out was 1800s, but it actually, I do a whole group sometime on diet culture and where it came from, right? But it goes, I think one of the first things we really saw was back with Socrates. I believe it was Socrates, even in ancient Greek, who was the first person to assign moral labels, right? He called anyone who wasn't eating the way he did barbarians, right? So that it's part of the culture. It's been around a long time. We're fighting against it, but like you said, it is definitely there. And so why is there controversy with it? Well, a lot of people, I really do believe everyone's just trying to do the best thing they can for themselves. And so, like I said before, different things sit differently for different people. So I really try not to tell someone specifically they can't do something. But there's a controversy because we do tend to get into a dangerous area when we start to cut things out completely. When we look at macronutrients, when we look at protein, fat, and carbohydrates, they all kind of serve a different purpose for our body. There is quite a lot there that they do, right? And they tend to work together. So, for example, when we talk about mental health and what we can do in that area, I often think about serotonin and dopamine production, right? Our happy chemicals and our ability to think and our ability to do all that. Well, a lot of that's coming from something called tryptophan, which is an amino acid we're going to be getting from protein. But tryptophan actually needs carbohydrates to transport it to the brain. So if we're not intaking carbohydrates, we're not going to be able to use the tryptophan to create serotonin in our brain, right? So we start to get in this dangerous category when we do cut things out. And at the same time, when we cut things out, we do create that special effect I was talking about earlier. When we look at nutrition and mood, we also look at the gut, right? There's a really big area of research right now is the brain-gut axis and the connection that's between the two. And what they've actually found is 95% of our serotonin is produced or synthesized in our gastrointestinal tract. So looking at gut health has become a really great area of gentle nutrition as well. And if we're cutting things out like carbohydrates, that is fiber. Fiber is a carbohydrate, which I realized at one point, a lot of people don't know that. And so we're going to be getting that from things like beans, complex carbohydrates, but also regular carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates as well will have that. Almonds, nuts, oatmeal, I mean, all these great things, right? So if we're cutting carbohydrates out, then how are we going to have the gut health we need to produce the chemicals we need for our brain? The other thing that we look at with it is energy sources. Our brain takes about 20 to 25% of our daily energy and calories up. And its preferred fuel source are going to be carbohydrates. So when we start looking at things like that, it kind of takes away from what we need to be able to think clearly and to function to our optimal best ability. On the other end of that, when we look at things like fat, right? Because low fat's been a big thing, I think, on and off, but it really got big in the 80s, I want to say, is when that really came around, right? Fat's also going to be so important for us. So fat is one of the main things that's going to increase something called satiety, basically your ability to feel full and for the length of time you feel full. So when we take fat out of the diet, one of the things we'll see is a really huge increase in hunger. And also, you're also going to see spikes in blood sugar because we look at fiber and fat as being some of the main things that slows gastric emptying, which is going to slow the absorption of glucose or sugar into the blood. So when we take those things out, you start to see a lot of the spikes that occur there. The other end of that, and sorry, I know this is a lot of information, so I will definitely take so many questions if anyone wants it later, but is that our brain, while its preferred fuel source is carbohydrates, also needs those other things. We've talked about how it needs protein, but it needs that fat. Our neuronal cells have something called the myelin sheath around it. And that's going to need fat. It's actually made of lipids, which are fat. And so if we're not getting that in our diet, we tend to see a lot less insulation of our cells, which can lead to a lot of cell damage as well. Then we look at things like the fat soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, E, and K, which are essential. We need them, right? And one of the main things about them is it actually needs fat to be absorbed. That's why it's called fat soluble. So if we're not intaking fat in our diet, we're not going to be absorbing those. And those are also really important for our brain and our memory function. So it gets into a lot, right? There's so many diets out there, but that's kind of the controversy that comes with it, is what is the efficacy of it? So how well is it really going to work, and how sustainable also is it?
How, as an intuitive eater, do you get all of those macronutrients and vitamins without doing something that requires tracking and being on some sort of a diet? Like, does your body just know that?
So your body definitely actually will speak up for it. It does take practice. One of the tools I really use with people, and it's going to sound so silly, is satisfaction factors. So that's things asking yourself, like taking a few minutes before every meal and really sitting there and thinking and like feeling in your body and saying, do I want something hot or cold? Do I want something sweet or salty or bitter or savory? Do I want something smooth? Maybe I want something a little bit lighter, something a little heavier. And when we really do get attuned to those types of questions, you will naturally find, and I've seen this time and time again, and there's been studies that I can provide that have been done on this, but you will find that your body really will speak up. So maybe I'm craving something, or my body needs a little bit more fat at the moment. And I tend to find that I'm craving something a little denser that typically has fat in it. And so it does speak up for that, but I'm gonna also share this secret with you guys. And I love this story. It goes back to my first nutrition class I ever took, Nutrition 101. And we had this assignment, right? It was called One Perfect Day. And we had to create a meal plan that encompassed everything. You had to get all your macronutrients, you had to get 100% of your vitamins and minerals, and you had to stay in a certain range for your own body. And I remember I was making this meal plan and it had like 0.2 cups of this and like trying to get everything in, right? Turns out I completely missed the point. The point is there's no one perfect day. It actually is impossible to get 100% of everything in one day. But the cool thing with nutrition is it's not one day, it's an average. So we're really looking at something over a period of time. So if you are really listening to yourself, maybe one day you're not getting 100% of one thing and the next day you do. So even without tracking, if you are listening, that will kind of happen and occur. Deficiencies do not occur overnight. They take a long time to occur.
So Genevieve, I'm a fan of
Interesting.
habits. I just feel that when things become a habit, it's easier. You just get used to them. I don't like abrupt changes or things that are all of a sudden. But it seems to me that what you're saying is like, we don't have to go all out, go to the grocery store and change our pantry. We just have to agree that we're going to try to listen to our body and change over the course of time. And I'm guessing that would be easier than an abrupt change in our life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Human beings are definitely creatures of habit, and we do not like change. I can say that in my own life as well. So, you had talked about earlier making little changes in gentle nutrition, right? Like kind of like learning to listen to what feels good for you. And I 100% agree, right? Like I said, with even becoming an intuitive eater and the practice it takes, it doesn't happen overnight. Most of the clients I see for months, frankly, to get to that place. I'm not saying for everyone here, right? Like typically, of course, I'm seeing people who have a disordered relationship with food. So I don't expect that a lot of people here would be starting necessarily from that point. So I'm not saying this would take months, but it does take practice. And it's not going to be 100% shift. I don't think that's sustainable, and I don't think that works for people. So I 100% agree. There are little things you can do. I think Lily is going to talk about some of them that she and I had talked about in a little bit, but really kind of having things around you that you would maybe crave and trying to make those little changes for yourself. Some people I know set alarms when, I know most of the people here are going to be lawyers, right? So like you're going to have very stressful, busy jobs. You're probably someone's always wanting something from you, and work most likely is very important, right? And I know a lot of the people I have seen who have been in professional careers like that tend to kind of forget about themselves when they're in the work, right? So like I've had people even set alarms to remember like, okay, let me have a snack. Let me make sure I take that moment for myself. And that tends to help over the course of time with it.
I think it might be a good time to talk about the next implementation tool, because I know a lot of you might be thinking, well, this is all great. How do I actually implement it? And the first time Genevieve sent me this hunger scale, I automatically became obsessed with like looking on the internet for every version of this I could find. There are a lot of versions of it, but basically, it's what Genevieve is saying is that, like, body check. I guess before you would figure out what you want, you have to figure out, are you actually hungry? And sometimes you might think, well, I know when I'm hungry because, like, I'll be starving, but that starving didn't come out of nowhere. Like, the hunger, like actual physical hunger, is a gradual process. So what the scale does, it's a tool to help you eat before you get to like level 1, which is painful hunger. I call that ketchup packet hungry, because like if I'm that hungry, like I would seriously just eat like whatever ketchup packets I had left over from my takeout food in my like glove box. I would eat anything, and I would just be in pain. I'm sure a lot of you might have gotten there out of too, because you're just so busy, and you're thinking, I'm going to eat after this call, I'm going to eat after that call. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I think it also helps you eat more mindfully, so you can kind of like take a check of when you should stop eating. But that's actually where I want to bring you into, Genevieve, besides your general comments. Like I've heard I think sometimes the hunger part might be easier, but in terms of when to stop eating, because it's like you referenced the Clean Plate Club earlier. So I've heard things like, there's a Japanese saying that's saying you should stop eating when you're 80% full. Or I've even heard people say like, leave one bite for God, so what is your take on all this? Like, how can you guide us to use a tool like this to kind of eat at the right time so we don't get too hungry and overeat, but then also stop at the right time?
Sure. So this is a scale. I have a slightly different one I use, but they both work the same, that I use very often with people. It's another one that's unfortunately one of those practice things that I encourage people before a meal, at least once a day, kind of take 3 to 5 minutes, sit there, I generally say no more than 3 minutes, but sit there and kind of feel what's going on. So what we're seeing here at the very low end, right, the painful hunger, that typically is going to be associated with low blood sugar. You might have shakiness, feeling faint that occurs. Whereas on 10, it's kind of similarly painful, but from overeating, right? So you mentioned, how do we know when we're really starting to get full? 5 being neutral, you're like, I'm not really hungry, I'm not really full. But when we start to get to the point where I like to say the pace of everything slows, you're kind of enjoying everything. That's probably around a 6. I don't know if anyone has ever kind of felt like they're very focused on the food, their thoughts are really on it. And then as you get towards the end of the meal, maybe your thoughts are drifting away from it. It's not the main focus anymore. That can usually be a good first indicator. And then as you start to practice this, you will start to feel the difference, right? In that 6 to that 8 category there. Comfortably full, comfortably satisfied. You're not feeling overextended. When we start to get towards that like 9, I often say people feel overextended. That doesn't actually relate, correlate to how you look. Like, we're not talking about bloating. We're talking about an internal feeling of feeling very extended in the stomach region is generally what people describe that as. Whereas if you are comfortably full, you're comfortably satisfied, you really sit there and you think, is there any hunger left? There's not. That's generally around where you want to stop, but it's not going to necessarily correlate to what's on your plate, right? Like the phrase, leave one bite for God. Maybe you are leaving food. Maybe it's not enough food and you need to grab a little bit more. Both do occur. But over time, you typically learn how to plate food for yourself based on where your hunger is at. And you typically will start to feel, no, you know what, I'm done, I'm full right now. But it does take practice of kind of feeling internally and seeing that. A really good practice test, if you want to practice trying to feel this for people, and this is directly from the creators of intuitive eating, is to try to feel your heartbeat without touching your body. I know we're all familiar with feeling here or feeling our wrist, but really sit there and try to feel if you can feel your heartbeat. And that's a really good way to practice interoceptive awareness, which is what that is, what we're talking about here.
Genevieve, I found very
What is the
interesting.
purpose of tracking your heart rate or listening to your heartbeat?
So the purpose of that is getting you to be able to truly feel your body. It tends to be a good identifier of something called interoceptive awareness. And I hope I'm saying that first word right. I could spell it for you, but and what that helps with in this way is then you're truly able to feel your hunger and fullness. They tend to correlate really well together of your ability to know what's going on within you.
Sorry, Jorge.
Genevieve, I was going to say that I was super surprised when you said take 3 to 5 minutes to feel how hungry you are before you start eating, right? Many of us, not always, right? But many of us have 3 to 5 minutes to eat, if not less. And, you know, I guess it's implied in this analysis that we should probably try to slow down when we eat. Sometimes we're eating so fast that we don't have time to assess how full we are. And maybe that also leads to some overeating.
I would say that definitely can occur. I know it's so hard with things like this. Sometimes, you know, at the end of the day, if you really only have 3 to 5 minutes, I'd rather you just eat, just get something, right? But if there is a time in your day, you know, maybe it's after work, or maybe it's on the weekend when you can try to practice this, it does become a really helpful tool. Because also if you're having only 3 to 5 minutes and it is that kind of unconscious eating that you guys were talking about earlier, there's no joy in that. There's no joy in that, right? Like I want to enjoy when I'm eating. I want to focus on my health, but I also want to enjoy what I'm eating. And if we're eating like that, we're probably not even tasting it at that point. Like, do we even enjoy it? Like, is this even something we want to eat, right? It's really hard to know. But if you do start practicing maybe outside of work hours, I would say it's actually a really helpful tool because it does become intuitive. And so eventually that 3 minutes before probably doesn't need to occur. I would say, you know, at this point in my day or in my life, I still use it sometimes, but more often than not, I just already know.
Yeah, thanks. That was helpful.
Genevieve, did you already speak to when we notice hunger? Or did I miss that? We're at the beginning of the hunger scale?
Sure, I did not. You were right. I talked about 1 and then I went all the way over to fullness to answer the question. So when we're looking at like 1 to 2, if we're using the scale I use has like 0 to 2, but it is going to be really apparent, kind of that hangry that's going on. A 1 is like you could pass out. You're so nauseous, you're so in pain. Whereas the 2 here, maybe I'm sure people are familiar with the term hangry, but you're just, you know, something's not right. You're pretty irritable probably at that point, right? And you're feeling it in your stomach. A 3 and 4 here, I would say is closer to maybe slightly empty. Your stomach feels slightly empty and your thoughts have drifted to food. But if you're to the point where your stomach is really grumbling, I would say that's probably a bit too hungry.
Cool, thank you.
I think we have a question.
And so I'm curious.
Do you mind if we ask the audience? So ideally, I eat at a certain time each day, whether hungry or not. Is that good or bad, or what's preferred, Genevieve?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good place to start, right? Especially if we aren't necessarily always aware of our hunger and fullness, if we are really involved in work, right? It's kind of eating at a certain time of day is a good reminder. But the goal, if our goal is to intuitively eat, we'd be listening to that. So you might find if you are someone who is on a schedule, which I personally am, right? With a lot of my clients, I actually eat with them. So I'll eat like morning snack with them. I'll eat lunch with them, things like that. On the days I don't, I'm hungry at that time. My body is ready for it, right? So you might find if you are someone who is already on a schedule that would probably happen naturally. But the ideal would be listening to ourselves. Now what happens then if you're going out with friends, it's 5 p.m., you're not going to be eating till 7, and you're like, well, I'm not at that place where I would normally eat right now. What do I do? But I know at 6 I will be, but I'll be out of the house. So in instances like that, it's actually okay. I tell people to eat a snack, even though maybe you're not at the place you normally would be, like still make sure you're prepping for yourself because you don't want to get to a place where you are overly hungry. So I am a big believer in snacks. I have snack drawers, and I generally will also bring something with me too. But it's okay to eat even if you're not, maybe you're at the 5, but you're going to be at like a 2 within an hour, right? Like once you've learned for yourself, that's okay too.
So we have a quick polling question. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was just going to say,
Lili.
I can tell a quick story to illustrate this. Genevieve and I were actually bridesmaids at a wedding together recently. And we both showed up at, you basically are on someone else's schedule sometimes too, considering that about when to eat. So we had both noticed that we both had like bags full of snacks, because we didn't, not only did we not know the schedule, but we also didn't know, you know, what the food was going to be. So like, I think that was a really good suggestion, but we can go on, I think, with the polling question about where people are right now. I think a lot of people answered it already. It looks like some people already had lunch, or they need a snack, or they're about neutral. Well, so, I mean, people seem to be able to accurately get a sense of where they are. Hopefully, I see Irene's on B, neutral. So neutral's in a good spot, right? You can kind of just like focus on, for me, I think like cognitively with respect to when I'm working, I know I'm getting hungry when I'm having a conversation with someone and I start like not being able to focus on what they're saying. Like when I'm on call after call and then I'm talking to someone and then it's like, oh, I didn't get that the first time. So I probably need to eat something. So my brain, like you were talking about earlier, the relationship between nutrition and brain, probably need some carbohydrates for my brain to function better. I think in the last section, maybe we're just going to go over some practical tools too.
Yeah, and I was going to say, that's a question I have for maybe both Genevieve and Lily, you, because I know you have this little black dress meal planning method, which I love. But it seems like, Genevieve, it can be challenging, you know, if we are looking at the, you know, waiting 3 minutes to think about what you want and then think about kind of what, do we want something hot or cold? I mean, it sounds like it requires a lot of cooking and a lot of time. Is that the case, or are there tools that we can use to kind of streamline that process? And Lily, maybe you could talk about the little black dress meal planning method, because I do love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what Lily's about to talk about. I'm actually a huge fan of too, right? Because I mean, it's pretty impossible to think that we can always have time for that. I'm definitely not cooking every day. I mean, I would love to, that sounds fantastic, but I don't, right? And so like, what do we do then? Well, not all of us maybe have the financial means, I don't know, right, to also always order food or something along those lines. So I think what Lily has would be great for that. But when it comes to snacks or meals, I often try to have, well, one, I know a lot of my personal tastes, right? And I think all of us probably have a lot of things we already know we like. So I make sure to have that around. I tend to think about it that way. What are some things that I typically like that can maybe fall into the different categories? So when I have my snack drawer, I'll have things like granola bars, I'll have chips, I'll have candy in there. I have hummus. I mean, like all these things I know I enjoy, crackers, but they all kind of fall into something a little different, right? Do I want something really crisp? Well, I have an apple that I really enjoy. Do I want something a little bit more savory? I have a croissant I really like. So kind of like little things like that, I prep for myself ahead of time that I know in those categories are things I tend to like. And then if I can cook or if I can order something, great. I actually really, one of my favorite things to do in the world is go out and eat with people. But it's just not always the reality. So I try to make sure I have a lot of the little stuff around with that.
I mean, we're at home, a lot of us were under a hybrid model. So I think some of it with the access to, you know, your own kitchen and everything makes it a little easier. But for me, so this little black dress planning method is my analogy to wardrobe. So like, this is the decision on what to eat and actually getting it to me, just, you know, maybe from the female point of view, but I think men can relate too, is like when you have to rush out the door, or to work, say, or just somewhere, you don't know what to wear, you don't have time to figure it out. So you just reach for that little black dress, the one you know is going to fit, that you don't have to dry, like even if there's a stain on it, you can get it out. Even if you gain some weight, it'll still fit. And men, I think it's like your go-to khakis or whatever. You can just grab it, you know where it is, you know that it fits. So it's the same with food, rather than like meticulously meal prep ahead of time, because that kind of goes against being able to judge what you want. Like if you meal prep for a week ahead of time, but you get to the meal and you're like, oh, I don't want this cold thing, I want this hot thing or the sour thing. This is like a little bit of a rotation, things that I know I can throw together very quickly or like order very quickly, like sweet greens. Like if you live in DC, like I have an app, I live near one. Emergency wise, I'll be on a call, I'll be like, here's my salad that's already stored and I'm gonna go grab it. Or, I mean, if I'm really in a bind, honestly, like I'll eat one of my snacks that I've listed, like I'll just eat a very large snack, and like it doesn't take any time for me to get some yogurt with fruit, but I'll get the full fat yogurt. So, you know, I'll get some fat. So those are just some of my strategies, like for having this regular, like sort of like a staple, a wardrobe staple, things you can mix and match very easily that take very little effort with staples that you have around most of the time. And one of the people on the webcast today actually is a trainer that I'm friends with from Equinox, and what she actually did was, you know, when, you know, those of us who are going into the office more, just having, like Genevieve said, like a little drawer full of, you know, reliable snacks or snacks in your bag that, you know, that if you're in a bind that you can have, that you're always going to like. So that's kind of some of my strategies on that. I have a template sample too in the back, along with some articles. There's a lot of references, articles for the topics we talked about, because we know we threw a lot of information at you, but there are a couple minutes left if anybody else has questions. We'd love to hear comments. And if not, maybe Genevieve, you can just like give some closing thoughts on.
Yeah, I realized that one thing Elizabeth asked me for, and I don't know if I did it, is also to provide some examples of foods that would be really good for health or good for brain health, right? So when I was talking about like fiber or like carbohydrates really, and then when I was talking about lipids or fats, right? Some things that I personally love. So when we're looking at fats, it's one of the ones you go, well, how do I get that in, right? Is it just with food, or what do we do with it? And there's a lot of really great ways. If you're looking at like I said earlier, gentle nutrition. So cooking with canola oil or olive oil. Canola oil is going to be a really great one in that way. Salmon or other types of fatty fish. Personally, salmon's the only fish I really enjoy, maybe a little tuna, but it's not my fave. And I really try to go off personal preferences, like I've mentioned, but nuts, hummus, avocados, those are all really great things that you can add in. The way I talk about this is I always look at what can I add in, not what can I take out. Because if everything's allowed, then I'm just going to be adding in. On the other side of that, when we're looking at carbohydrates, if you are someone who likes whole grains, they can be a great addition. I definitely have them. I also definitely have not kind of that brown rice or whole grain as well, just depending. Almonds, oatmeal, most vegetables and fruits will have it as well, just not juices, because that does take the fiber out. But if you're someone who likes a fruit juice, that's also fine. But if you're looking at how to add in some of those things.
And we didn't have time to get into it, but there's also the concept of a joyful movement. Maybe we can cover that on a part 2 of this, because there is a whole flip side. We had covered, Elizabeth, I know you and your team had covered exercise on an earlier panel, but I think we're about out of time, so we might just stop there. But we'd love to hear feedback and what you guys thought, and really enjoyed having you all here. Thank you.
I also just wanted to, if I can, plug Lili's. Her blog is so much fun. I really enjoy reading it. It's got a ton of incredibly useful resources. Once I learned about it, I mean, it is very, to me, I feel like it's tailored to, you know, things that occur in my life all of the time. And so I really enjoy it. So I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. And I know Jorge and I, we really genuinely appreciate both Lili and Genevieve taking the time to talk with us today. I think this has been useful for me and incredibly fun. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. And I've got information on where you can find Genevieve too right here. So yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much. Thanks everyone for spending their lunchtime with us. And again, thank you, Lili and Genevieve and Jorge, as always. I hope everybody has a great rest of their week and get to enjoy this rain a little bit. Because I do love the rain. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. I think so.